Outlook 2026. I'm David McLean, and I know a few of you in the room, and it's a great morning to be in the room with all of you. It's as the new chair of the Financial Services Council. This morning is a tremendous opportunity for the whole sector to gather and to look forward, to consider the impacts we have and the opportunities we have to improve financial outcomes for New Zealanders. There's a lot in the sector to be tremendously proud of. And this morning's release of the State of the Sector report shows some of what our sector can achieve. The financial services sector is now the 7th largest by GDP in New Zealand, injecting over 16 billion into the economy and outranking many other high-performing sectors. The report also highlights the sector's capability. Between 2020 and 2024, labour and capital outputs increased 22%, reflecting workforce growth in the sector and sustained investment in technology, digital platforms, cybersecurity and regulatory capability. But despite those increases in what sound like costs, the sector is also a productivity superstar with a 22% increase in productivity since 2022. The report shows that financial services are an essential part of New Zealand's economic infrastructure and a key driver of long-term investment, productivity and national prosperity. The sector underpins growth and supports households, businesses and policymakers to plan with confidence. These are things that we should all in the sector be rightly proud of. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over to Aimie of Chapman Tripp, who will introduce our Prime Minister. Thank you very much.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, David, for that introduction. As David said, my name is Aimie Peart and I'm a litigation and dispute resolution partner at Chapman Tripp, specialising in banking and financial services. On behalf of Chapman Tripp, I am delighted to be here today and to have the privilege of introducing the Prime Minister and the CEO of the FSC. Chapman Tripp has a long-standing relationship with the FSC. With its vision of growing the financial confidence and well-being of New Zealanders, the FSC does an important job advocating for the financial services sector, which we consider is particularly important in this current climate of uncertainty and change. We think the theme for this year's conference, Amplify, encapsulates its mission perfectly. As the conference theme says, one voice can start a conversation, many voices can transform the future. And the event today is perfectly timed. The financial services sector is both integral to the success of New Zealand and our people, and it is deeply connected to the global economy, the political landscape, and the world. And while change is constant, we are in a heightened phase, with technological disruptions coming thick and fast, the continuation of regulatory disruption, continued cost of living pressures, fundamental shifts and fundamental generational shifts in how consumers interact with their financial services providers, international politics creating uncertainty and potential opportunities, and our own general election later this year, to name but a few. To be successful, the financial services sector must grapple with these changes and drive its own positive change to advance New Zealanders and our country. It is time to take stock of where we are and where we are going. And so, with that aspiration of driving positive change, we are excited that the Prime Minister is here today, the start of the year, to discuss his outlook for 2026. The Prime Minister and the CEO of the FSC will have a fireside chat, discussing some of the gritty questions top of mind for the financial services sector, including investment, life and health insurance, and the role that these areas play for New Zealand and New Zealanders. After the fireside chat, there'll be an opportunity for questions from the audience before moving on to our other speakers.
Welcome, Prime Minister. Thank you, Aimie, for that very kind introduction. And thank you, Prime Minister, for your time this morning. Really good to see you here. There's lots to talk about. I want to open with sort of a bit of a look back at the State of the Nation that you made a few weeks ago and sort of build on some of those themes. So from your perspective as Prime Minister, what does a more prosperous and confident New Zealand look like in the next 2 to 3 years? And what are the key elements required to achieve that over the next decade?
Well, look, firstly, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here, and it's great to be amongst people who are living and working in an absolutely brilliant industry, and a positive one that's actually growing, and it's doing incredibly well, and it's got so much more to contribute to our economy. Can I just acknowledge David and Kirk and say thank you so much for your leadership of the Council, but also can I acknowledge we've got Minister Scott Simpson here, and we've actually got, I think, 3 members of National Party MPs, Nancy Liu, Cam Brewer, and Dan Bidwar, who are on the FEC committee as well. So, but it's great to be here with you all today. It's good to be with you, mate. It's a bit like Oprah. You're the Oprah of the Financial Services Council. I'm looking forward to this fireside chat. It could go anywhere. So I promise not to do a Tom Cruise and bounce up and down on the chair for you. But yeah, I know you'd like to see me do it, but I won't. But look, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, first and foremost, we are very clear, 24 months into this job, that we have inherited a bit of a mess and we have to do a turnaround job. And so for us, a lot of that is getting back to financial discipline and fiscal discipline and fixing what I call a lot of the basics. So getting spending under control so we can bring inflation down, get interest rates down, get the economy growing, get people into work. We are having to deal with a set of fiscals that now have a huge amount of debt. As you've seen, there's a doubling of the debt. We've got a pathway and a track that we're just working our way through year in, year out, good financial discipline. That's important because you start to think about, the track that we're on versus even when I look at the Australian track of where they are with respect to no pathway to surpluses, huge amounts of debt coming down the pike for them as well. I think, we've just got to have discipline and keep executing those basics brilliantly. We do have the recovery underway. It's not felt equally across the whole of the country yet, and not everyone's feeling it yet. But, those leading indicators are pretty encouraging, and we should take good encouragement from it. So now the opportunity is, let's not just watch a recovery take place, but actually use the moment to build the future and to shape where we want to go as a country, to realise the potential that's here. And when you step back and boil down and say, what do we have to do differently, or where the opportunity actually is for us to create more wealth for us as New Zealanders, it really comes back to 5 things. When you look at other 5 million people countries around the world and ask, why are they wealthier than us? It comes back to these 5 things. And they are a world-class education system. You need to have a science sector that's adding value and commercialising your research and development efforts. You need to make sure we've got modern, reliable infrastructure. It's an easy place to do business, get rid of the red tape, the bureaucracy, a lot of that challenge. And then the 5th thing is really about trade and investment. And that has been the fundamental problem that we all collectively have to deal with, is over the last 30 years under successive governments of different colours and persuasions, we have been working incredibly hard, but we have not been able to generate enough economic productivity to lift our collective living standards in the way that we want to or should do. And that's the opportunity that I think we have, and that's the reason I came to politics 4 or 5 years ago, because with some of you in this room, we started talking about, well, how would we do that? How do we create that opportunity? But it does boil back to those 5 things. And that's pretty exciting because we can do exceptionally well as New Zealand out there in the world. There's 195 countries, 8 billion people. There are no excuses for why we can't do well. We have abundant natural resources. We're well positioned in the Indo-Pacific region. We have strong social and democratic institutions, and we have really talented people. So let's go out and make our own future. Despite the volatility that's sitting out there, there's no reason that we can't perform extremely well for ourselves in the years ahead. But it's those 5 things I think we have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think those are, very strong platforms for New Zealand. If we can execute those over the next 10 years or achieve them over the next 10 years and certainly in the short term as well, particularly that fiscal position, I think, which we can really underpin strong economic growth in the future. So what do you think? I mean, we've sort of talked a little bit about this. What do you think New Zealand's core economic strengths are and New Zealand's core vulnerabilities are? And aside from doing those 5 things, what are the other things that you'd be looking for from the business community to help address some of those opportunities and vulnerabilities?
Well, the first thing is that, as I said before, I just think we are incredibly well positioned. It's a much more volatile, uncertain world, and it will be going forward from here. The ocean is much more choppy, but there's no reason we can't sail our boat from where we are today to where we want to get to and do incredibly well. It's about our relative performance to other countries and how we navigate some of the global challenges that we've got. And I think New Zealand's a great safe haven, as I said, for investment, I think, and we're making that case strongly in the world. As I said, we've got these structural things that I think we should say, can serve us incredibly well. The bits that I think we need to work harder on are essentially 2. I think, we need to apply more added value to the products and services that we sell internationally. If I look at the work of, say, the dairy sector versus, say, the wool sector, where we're still in the commodity game in wool, but we're actually in a high-value R&D applied set of products and through dairy that's actually getting premium prices. That's a good example. So we've got to retool our science sector, and we've been looking particularly to Ireland as a case study of how to go about doing that. And Shane Retty's been leading that work of how do we get our universities, our public research organisations, as we now call them, and business R&D. How do we not have that siloed, but how do we get more of a better ecosystem that ultimately can create more value to product, services and innovation? But the second big opportunity is really in adoption of technology, AI, automation. And the reason I say that is that when you look at our small, medium enterprise market across New Zealand, the top 10% are 7 times more productive than the bottom 10% of firms in the SME market. And the reason is their adoption of technology as the difference maker that makes them much more productive. And so that's why you've seen us introduce things like investment boost to try and encourage firms to invest in technology that ultimately will make them, with accelerated depreciation, make them much more effective. But that's really exciting. We're never going to be the leaders in AI, but what we should be having an ambition around is how do we become the leaders in the application of AI into business, government and community. And I think there's just a huge opportunity for that. Government is well behind the 8 ball. The literacy is very, very poor. Our technology, fluency and literacy is really, really bad compared to what you see in corporate life or in the business world. Why can't a 32-year-old mum with an 11 and a 9-year-old, and the 9-year-old needs eyeglasses, why can't she just do an inquiry that says, what am I working for family tax credits and how do I get eyeglasses for the 9-year-old? Instead, she's got to go through websites and MSD and health and IR and all of that stuff, and that's just not modern. And so we've got a massive opportunity to, I think, from a government point of view, of disrupting government by digitising it and having large service-based organisations that are customer-focused and technology-enabled. And so you can help us in a business sense because you're well ahead of where government is for sure. But I think us getting excellent at the application of AI as a vision that we should aspire to as a country would be pretty exciting, because that would drive a lot of our productivity improvement that we need to see across the country. There's a lot of talk about AI and the negatives of it, and I get all of that. We'll deal with that in a multilateral sense with other countries about making sure we've got risk management and frameworks around that. But really, we have to get out there and embrace it. There's no reason why Kiwis can't do that and Kiwi firms can't lead out on that for us.
Well, I mean, you make a good point about productivity. I mean, our report, State of the Sector report today says we're one of the most productive sectors in the country. And I'll just give a bit of a shout out to the fintechs that are operating, particularly in the insurance space and insurtech. They are deploying AI to assist insurers in the right kind of way to be as efficient and as effective as possible so they can deliver to customers. So, I mean, it's certainly something that is very near and dear to the hearts of the people in this room. So and
you can see that, right? You've had 11% growth a year. And exactly, there's a lot of innovation in this sector. And actually, that's what things like open banking are designed to do, to get the fintechs sort of able to innovate in a much more modern, contemporary kind of way.
Yeah, we've got obviously Professor Robert Patman, who's going to give a talk on the.
I've followed him for ages. I was telling him before. It's really awesome to meet him.
State of geopolitics. But I do want to just touch on the comment that you made in the State of the Nation around the rupture of the rules-based order, and that was similarly echoed by Mark Carney in his Davos speech. Can you just give us a bit of an outline of what you think the consequences of that rupture are for New Zealand and for particularly for a business community like ours, who's heavily globalised in the financial services sector?
Yeah, look, I think I spoke about this at Raisina in India a year ago, and I sort of echoed some of those themes again in my State of the Nation speech this year. There is no doubt about it. The rules-based system is under huge threat, and there has been a rupture. What has served the world incredibly well for 70 years is breaking down. And there's 3 fundamental things that are happening. You're seeing a shift from rules to power. And so what we've gone from is a multilateral world to a multipolar world. And as a result, the biggest countries dominate the smallest ones and exercise their power to do so. And that's not good for the world, I don't think. The second thing is that you're seeing a huge shift from economics to security. And in fact, the two are becoming interdependent. So if you think about a conflict like Ukraine, I was on a coalition of the willing call just 2 nights ago with Zelensky, 4 years into a war like that. But that massive conflict in Europe caused massive economic pain and suffering in Western Europe, obviously with massively high energy prices. So if you don't have stability, you end up not being able to create prosperity, and vice versa. And so there's a massive shift, as you're seeing, into security and defence, and the two coming together in that way. And the third thing is, a lot of us build our businesses on the back of globally efficient supply chains, of being able to source the least cost product and be able to put supply chains together through a global network. And that has increasingly moved from sort of lowest cost or massive globalisation supply chains into sort of more nationally resilient supply chains. So those three shifts are really what we're experiencing right now. And New Zealand as a country has done exceptionally well through the rules-based system, have so many other small and medium-sized countries as well. Countries like Singapore and ourselves, and when we're close with Singapore, we talk about this a lot, about how do we advocate for the rules-based system. And that's why when Trump announced his tariffs, one of the first things I did is get on the phone to Ursula von der Leyen, the President of Europe, to say, hey, listen, between the EU, the CPTPP and ASEAN, we've actually got probably 40% of global trade. And it's really important that we actually reinforce the rules-based system. And in October, we had our trade ministers from ASEAN and from CPTPP meet with the European trade ministers for the first time to make sure that we can hold on to that system, because that has served us well and served the world well. The tariffs dynamic that we're observing is a real, we know how that movie ends, and it doesn't end well, is my view. And we make that case to the Americans all the time. But we also have to be principled and pragmatic. And so that's very much how we navigate our relationships in the world, as you would expect. I think so I think those are the sort of the big challenges that we're seeing. And I think we keep following and leading with our values and articulating what we stand up for. But also, as I said, be pragmatic, and we can disagree without being disagreeable. There are areas in all of our relationships where we cooperate, and then there are differences that we have to call out and stand up for. So, we keep making the case for that, and I think we can be a really good, honest broker. And actually, small countries, a good friend of mine, Alexander Stubb, who's the president of Finland, is making the case in Europe very strongly for the rules-based system. You've seen Mark do it out of Canada, who we can advocate very strongly for that, certainly in our region as well. So, it's a challenging world, it's a different world, but then it all comes back to relative competitiveness, because there's 195 countries dealing with the same problems. So you can either use it as excuses for poor performance, or you can say that's just the context that we're now in, and actually how do we navigate through that context and perform better than others in order to get better outcomes. And I think we can do that very well.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to be extremely responsive, not just as a business community, but as a society, in terms of some of those things, right? Yeah. That's government, community.
The only thing I'd say is that there's two things you can do. You've got to control what you can control. And the two things that we can control is we can build a better homeland here in New Zealand and a stronger New Zealand. And that's about strengthening our economy in the way that we talked about, adding more value, lifting economic productivity, doing the reform and building out the future that we want to see. And the second thing we have to do is diversify and deepen those relationships across the piece. And in fairness, from day one, that's been a big priority of mine, because I felt that we had lost a lot of influence in the world, if I'm honest about it, and we had focused in Europe rather than in the Indo-Pacific region, where our security and our prosperity sits. And so we've had a big pivot to make sure that we are upgrading and building out our relationships. And you see it, like the EU, trade with the EU went up 29% last year. The UK, it went up 20%. Indian FTA, we've opened up and concluded, those negotiations before Christmas. The GCC, the UAE, what we did upgrading every relationship across Southeast Asia and continuing to grow out into China and Japan and Korea has been really important. So we can create the optionality. Then you as business leaders go out there in the world with confidence and agility, and you're seeing that with New Zealand's exporters. They are moving their product between markets. But it is understanding that it's not just trade, it's actually about this broader geopolitical contest that's going on, and particularly in the area of AI, right? I mean, you see in America that's well ahead of China on AI technology, but you see a China that controls critical minerals, and that is where the geopolitical tension, some of the conversations going. And the second part of it is energy becomes really critical for economic growth and strategy going forward from here. And that's why getting our energy strategy right is important, because it's the derailer or the enabler of much more economic growth to happen, particularly in an AI generated world where you need a lot more energy power.
Yeah, and certainly for resilience, right? It is just touch on the trade component because, New Zealand has had a very trade-centric strategy, and you rightly point out the world is changing. I just give a shout out to my good friend Vangelis Vitalis, who I often describe as taking a toothpick into a gunfight. But that also goes to what we describe, because it's a very values-based conversation that he's taking into those negotiations, right? And that's what we can bring to those conversations. Hey, just turn a little bit inward for a while to the financial services sector. We cover KiwiSaver and investment management and life and health insurance. And with the way that we think about that as a holistic group of financial resilience tools for New Zealanders, there's some things that we are advocating for in terms of removing some barriers which we think are viable to ensure that more New Zealanders can get access to those products at a cheaper price. But we'll continue that conversation another day. But just reflecting on this, perhaps the business community itself. Again, what do you want to see from us as a business community, particularly in the financial services sector, particularly when we're shouting about how well we're doing in terms of productivity and all those things? What else do you want to see from us when we're engaging with the government?
Yeah, look, first and foremost, you are a really important sector, and the fact that you see yourself increasingly as a sector that's a very important one to our economy and to our society is really important, that you elevate to do that. And the reason's pretty simple, is that you think about liquidity, stability, prosperity, all of those things that you are contributing and helping New Zealand achieve is really important. We have a lot of work to do to move New Zealanders' mindsets, as you know, from an investment point of view, out of housing into a broader set of productive investments, and I know that journey is up and running. That's why you've seen us as a government saying increasing savings and investment. So we've got domestic pools of capital is important, but so that we set people better up for retirement by lifting KiwiSaver contributions. We're going to start that process in April this year, again in 28, April 1. But our proposal as a national party is we've got to lift it up to 12% combined contribution by 2032, so we match the Australians and set that up. But building the literacy and the fluency, I lived in America for 8 years, I lived in Australia for 5 years, and when you think about how a 401k conversation happens around a water cooler in America, in my office in Chicago, the literacy on the financial products was so much more advanced. Having said that, in the last couple of years, I've felt that New Zealand's literacy, with a bunch of technology and innovation that you've had in your sector, has been very good. So you have a huge role to play in all of that. And what I just ask is, we as a government don't want to work in a parent-child way. We don't want to tell you what you should be doing. Yes, we've got to have good, smart, sensible regulation. It shouldn't be overbearing, but it should be protecting consumers and all that good stuff. But what we want to do is work in an adult-to-adult way, where actually you as business leaders can move with great speed and scale and execute. We as political leaders and government can set up the operating system for you to navigate, and our community leaders can actually see the pain, the hurt, the need, the frustration. A lot of what we've implemented in the last 24 months has actually come from conversations with folk like yourselves. So if you think about the investment boost decision to put a 20% accelerated depreciation out there to lift investment and technology so that we can improve productivity, that came from conversations with business people, not from our public servants sitting in Wellington. And so what I really wish is that, I'd love it. I know there's things you want to discuss like FBT on insurance products or, health insurance, those kinds of things. But just take a step back, think strategically as a sector. What are the 5 big things that you think would be the single biggest things that would make the biggest difference to New Zealanders in the fastest amount of time and be profound? And let's start that conversation, because you're better positioned than any of our folk inside of Wellington Public Service to determine what should be happening. And I think, and you see the front line and you see the customer and you understand what they're missing and what's needed and what would be the barriers or the opportunities that we could put together. So my ask is that as sectors, come to us with your thoughts, not just the problem, but come with the solution, and let's debate it. And maybe we can agree on 75, 80% of it, but finding common ground on an agenda that links our government and the sector together on a work plan to say, right, well, how do we work our way through those things? And let's just pick 3 to 5 things and do them well and execute them and make a decision, yes or no, and then move on to the next one and the next one. And that's how we sort of start to get the improvement. I think it's a much more efficient way of working rather than sort of, I think that would be quite a good way to do a work plan together that way.
Yeah, and I think that's good advice, and that's very much how the FSC does its advocacy. We come to the table with a solution that can be picked up, that is palatable, that is workable for New Zealanders. So, hey, I see that there is some opportunity for questions from the audience. As long as you're up for that, of course, I know you're up for that. You know. Do we have some questions from the audience? Anyone brave enough to fire a couple of questions at the Prime Minister? I have this generic one. It's like, what keeps you up at night? And it's certainly not being interviewed by Kirk Hope on the stage at the FSC Outlook.
No, I mean, I guess I just feel, I've been in this job now for 2 years. So it feels like 20 years. It's more than 2 months. But that's a lack of sleep, actually. And I came to politics 4 or 5 years ago because, honestly, like many of you in this room, this is an awesome, awesome country, right? There are no excuses for why we can't build the best damn small country on earth, period, right? There really isn't. And that requires us as business, government and community to work together in ways that we haven't worked together as an adult partnership and relationship, not parent-child. And so as a result, there are things that we can equally do that others can't, that the other parties can't do in our society, but we've got to work together and pull that together. And so I actually feel incredibly positive and optimistic and determined that we have a fantastic future, but we will get what we deserve. And we'll get, if we want to keep talking and just discussing stuff, that's lovely. But actually we need to move it into action and actually secure outcomes for people. All around the world, you're seeing really grumpy populations, right? When I talk to other world leaders, it's a real challenge. They've gone through COVID. They're dealing with the effects of high inflation, which we hadn't seen in 35 years. They're dealing with technological dislocation. And all of that's causing grumpiness, essentially. And what our people really want from us is to deliver for them and to make their daily lives better. And I think let's focus on the delivery and the outcomes. That's what they actually expect to see from their political leaders and from their business leaders and from their community leaders. And so I feel incredibly excited. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, I understand anxiety about what's going on in the world. We understand that well, but we should back ourselves with confidence to go out there and happen to it with ambition and aspiration. And I think we can do exceptionally well for ourselves if we go to work.
Well, you're able to get some sleep, of course.
Well, there's so much to do. I mean, it's pretty exciting. I wake up at 4:30 7 days a week because there's a lot to go. I mean, it's pretty cool.
And we appreciate the work that you do, Prime Minister. I'm just going to ask... Oh, yeah, sure.
You touched on education at the start. Oh, yes, Rich. I think every government will always want that, but we haven't got it at the moment. Just any perspectives on kind of what it's really going to take and what we need to learn from? Great
question. So the question is about education. We are not where we need to be, and what have you learnt and what can we do about it? Look, I'm a big believer of what situation are we in? And as a CEO, former CEO, and as Prime Minister, I look at it and go, no, New Zealand is in a turnaround job. Actually, things haven't been swimmingly great and doing well. And so we've really got to confront some of the brutal facts of our reality. And when you do a turnaround job, you've got to get clear on problem definition, have a common sense plan, get some different outcomes, and then people have got to feel it. And that's the 4 stages that we're trying to follow as a government, whether it's in the economy, law and order, health, education. On education, I'm really grateful for your question, because I'm a kid, as I've often said, is that my mum and dad left school at 15, 16, like many of you in the room, first to go to university. And education got me from a set of circumstances to a better set of circumstances. And I don't believe in an equality of outcome, but I believe very strongly in an equality of opportunity. And I think 5-year-olds setting off in life in New Zealand, irrespective of their circumstances, deserve an equal shot at the Kiwi dream, whatever that may be for them. And the single biggest thing that I believe is education. And that's why for 15 years I've studied education systems all around the world, because when you look at our situation, what's the problem we inherited? And I'm not meaning to beat up on the previous administration or government, but I'm a big believer, get clear on the facts of your reality, because people, sometimes in New Zealand we don't like to do that. We don't want to call that out. But when you've got 55% of our kids not at school regularly, that's a problem. Because by the time they get to 16, they've lost 1 whole year of education. And so they're already behind the Singaporeans, the Canadians, the Irish, the New South Wales kids, and that's not acceptable. We had 80% of our kids getting into high school not at the standard they need to be at on mathematics. we had 50% getting into high school year 9, not at the standard need to be at on reading. So how do we build out the AI engineers we need to do the application that I just talked about, or the 4-lane highway from Auckland to Whangarei with engineering skills, if we can't teach kids to read and do the basics well and then drive their own education from there? So that's the problem. What's the plan? The plan has been, ban mobile phones. It's been pretty good, actually, to focus kids' attention in classroom. 65% less cyberbullying going on, so really good outcome. But
lower phone bills as well.
Yeah, lower phone bills, yeah. It's quite funny, actually. I go into the high schools now and the kids, I say, oh, hi guys, I stand up at school assemblies. I'm the guy that banned your mobile phone, and sort of get a bit grumpy and that stuff. But now the kids come up and just say, actually, I'm really thankful you did that. You know, they actually see that we took control of something they weren't in control of, the principals weren't in control of, the parents weren't in control of, and that's been a good thing. The bigger issue, though, is how do we teach our kids the same way every day, one way, how to do reading, how to do mathematics. And so we've implemented something called structured literacy, structured numeracy. And we're seeing some amazing results already. You know, we've seen an 18% improvement of kids, 5-year-olds, at or exceeding the standard we need to be at on reading just this year. And that's so exciting, because when you sit in a classroom with a 5-year-old and they get a twinkle in their eye and they're passionate about learning and they feel good about themselves and I can do this, it's really special. We had a program with kids over the summer period who were 1.5, 2 years behind before they got in later primary school. Put a hothouse program around them, and we lifted in 12 weeks and caught them up a year and a half of knowledge just on mathematics. So we know that the structured literacy, structured numeracy thing is working. And we also know we've had to decide now, let's go rip off and replace NCA, because actually when you have words like merit and achieved and distinction or whatever, that's lovely. But actually we're going to go do something called grades. We're going to go back to a score. So you might get 57% or 63%. Novel idea, but I mean, basically, you know, we'll have some core subjects and then we have some academic and some vocational subjects as well. But, you know, we have to put more rigour into those qualifications, because you're right, our standards have slipped and our performance against other countries in the world have slipped. And I'm not prepared to have our 16-year-olds not at the same standard of a Canadian or the Irish or the New South Wales. And the reason's pretty simple, right? I mean, New South Wales is 35% wealthier per person than New Zealand. Ireland, we look at Ireland as a country very similar to New Zealand. They're twice as wealthy as us per person now. Singapore is almost 3 times as wealthy per person. When you're 3 times as wealthy as New Zealand, you get twice as many doctors, nurses. So we have to get education in place to get high-paying jobs, to grow the economy so that we can deliver better quality public services. So that's the pathway. Problem's pretty clear. We've put some big interventions in place: structured numeracy, structured literacy, learning support coordinators as we see more ASD and other things in this classrooms, but also NCA replacement. And then we've got to get our ecosystem right in our universities with our, as I said, in the R&D research development side as well. And I think there's some good work happening there as well. But you know, that's the fundamentally most important thing to me is if we can build a world-class education system, we're setting our kids up for an awesome future and a better future than what we had. More opportunities, more choices, that's good.
Great to see a passion for education as well, Prime Minister. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people in this room who probably share just the same experience, you know.
Exactly, I think, yeah.
Kia ora, Mr Luxon. Good to
Kia ora.
see you this morning. I'm Christine Liggins. I'm the CEO of Debt Fix Foundation, unfunded by the national government, just saying. I deal with a lot of KiwiSaver providers in their withdrawal process. And as you appreciate, we've seen a great increase in the number of withdrawals in the last few months. And over the years, it's just climbing. I've got a lot to say on this subject, but my question to you this morning is, what can we do about stopping the drain of KiwiSaver?
Yeah, so, I mean, first and foremost, run the economy properly. So if you care about working people and low-income New Zealanders, you don't run up inflation to 7.3%. You don't triple the debt. I wrote an interest bill the other day for $9 to $10 billion. That is more than it costs to run our police, our defence, our customs, our corrections, and our justice sectors, just their operational expenses every year. That's 5 Dunedin hospitals I don't get to build each and every year because of that debt. So that's why I've always said, if you care deeply about working New Zealanders and low-income New Zealanders, you are a fiscal conservative and you have financial discipline. You don't do what happened in the previous administration, which caused a huge amount of pain and suffering that people have been experiencing. And sadly, yes, they are having to withdraw from their KiwiSaver accounts. So I talk pretty bluntly about it, but that's the reality of it, because if you don't run the economy well, that's the consequences, that we end up dealing with the effects of high inflation, cost of living, and it's still tough for many, many Kiwis out there, absolutely. And that's why the answer is actually we have to build a bigger, better economy that raises our collective living standards. And it is the things that we're talking about: education, more value-added products, infrastructure, compliance, red tape, trade and investment. That's the stuff that's growing the economy. I'm pleased to say that actually the economy's been growing, wages have been growing faster than actually inflation in our period of time in government. But you shouldn't have a 30% growth in housing in one year in this country. In a country with abundant land, 5 million people, in a country the same size as Japan and the UK, unacceptable. That has caused huge amounts of pain and suffering on working New Zealanders who can't get ahead as a result of that stuff. So you have to take a step back and think about the policy prescription that you're putting in place to make sure that you create a much better economy that people can get ahead and do well. But I fully acknowledge, in 24 months, that's what I've been dealing with. That's what I was inherited, was a hell of an economic mess where inflation got out of control. And we had learnt that lesson 30 years earlier about not letting that situation happen, because we felt that pain and suffering in the 70s and 80s, and lo and behold, it's happened again. So that's why we've had to work through and get our spending under control. That's why we've brought inflation down. We get interest rates coming down, we get the economy growing, and then we get people into work, and we get wages growing faster than inflation. That's sufficient, but it's not the only thing we need to do. We then need to build out the platforms for an economy that creates more wealth for everybody in this economy and is able to lift the floor and lift the collective living standards. And that's the work that's pretty exciting, but we've got to front up to it and face up to it. So actually we are lifting KiwiSaver contribution rates. It's difficult. A lot of people say to us that's going to be tough on businesses to be able to afford that extra cost, but it's the right thing to do for the long term to create retirement incomes that are much more superior and better for people down the road. We are having to deal with RMA reform because it's the single biggest thing causing huge amounts of red tape and stopping things getting done, and therefore creating high-paying jobs in this country. We are having to deal with educational reform because we don't want to be in the bottom 5 countries on science and maths and reading compared to our other competitors that we compete with. So it is I'm trying to be pretty blunt and direct about it, but that's the reality of fix the basics, make sure there's good financial discipline. That's not sufficient. We have to then build out the platforms for this economy to actually do what it needs to do, and we haven't done that over the last 30 years under successive governments of different colours, as I've said before.
Another topic that you're very passionate about, Prime Minister, the New Zealand economy and society. Hey, look, I just want to thank you again for your time today. I think
Pleasure.
we'll close that off. Delighted to have you here, and we'll hope to have you back next year, and we'll see how the election goes. We obviously good luck with for that. It doesn't come down to luck, I'm sure. Look, I mean, again, I think what you've seen from the Prime Minister is some things that the government are doing that he personally is deeply passionate and committed to, and I think that's really what we need out of our leaders. It's what we need out of our business leaders, and it's what we need out of the leaders of our government. So once again, Prime Minister, thank you. I know you've got a busy day ahead, as every day is.
Can I just say to all of you, don't ever give up on New Zealand. I mean, this is honestly the best country on earth. Like, it really is. And together, as government, business, community, we get to shape what happens next. And I think we can do exceptionally well for ourselves. And so I just want to encourage you to say, like, as a business sector, thank you for what you do with your individual companies. I know it's challenging leading organisations where you've got to get commercial results, you've got to get cultural results, you've got to get customer results. That's really the big things that you've got to deliver as a CEO. And that's been difficult in the challenging economic cycle that we've been through and are going through. And so I want to say thank you for what you do in those leadership roles. But then think about this sector, which is a really important one to our economy. And I just encourage you to frame up the strategic issues that you think would make us go faster and do better. And feel free to put that platform together and engage with our ministers. I have performance reviews on my ministers every 6 months, and one of the things is how often are you out of those wood-panelled offices in the beehive and actually talking to people in the real world who actually are at the front line of the coalface of seeing what's going on. So I know Scott would be very welcoming of actually getting an agenda from you that at least we can debate, discuss, and say yes or no to, but then find common ground and move forward and get things sorted for people and deliver it for people. So again, thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for what you're doing with your businesses. Appreciate it.
I'll just introduce our next speaker, Professor Robert Patman, who's going to talk to us about the political environment and the economic environment across the world that the financial services sector in particular will be operating in 2026. So, Professor Patman, I'll hand over to you.
Kia ora koutou. Good morning. First of all, big thank you to Kirk and also the magnificent team at the Financial Services Council who've given me the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you this morning. My presentation is titled, ambitiously, The World and New Zealand. In a recent speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, spoke about a rupture in the current world order, the end of a pleasant fiction concerning, and he was diplomatic enough not to name it as such, the US-led international rules-based order, because Carney was actually referring not to the death of the rules-based order, but to the end of the US-led international rules-based order. And of course, Carney also referred to the intensification of geopolitics. Carney acknowledged that the current global situation did not come out of a clear blue sky. And I think we can trace its origins to a number of major trends that either intensified or appeared after 9/11. First, in recent decades, globalization, a restless and overarching megatrend, which can be defined as the intensification of technologically driven links between societies, institutions, cultures, and individuals on a worldwide basis, and we've been living through this process for the last 4 decades. That process has been radically reshaping the world in which we live. On the one hand, globalization has been symbolized by the advent of the social media, which materialized around about 2006, 2007, the consolidation of big tech, that is the world's largest, most powerful and influential technology companies, including Google, Apple, Meta, TikTok, Amazon, and Microsoft. We've also seen the AI revolution, the steady emergence of a number of technologies, global payment systems, and cross-border labor markets. On the other hand, so we've seen on the one hand, forces making the world smaller. On the other hand, the vulnerabilities of this newfound global interconnectedness has generated a backlash of what I would call sovereigntism. That the belief that the nation state is above all the most legitimate form of political organization. Sovereigntism has been linked to developments like the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, post-2015 migration waves, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the dysfunction of institutions such as the United Nations Security Council and also the World Trade Organization. So globalization has been a real trend, but it's had dual effects. Second, and not unrelated, the post-9/11 era has been marked by the steady erosion of an international rules-based order, as Carney acknowledged. What is a rules-based order? It's enshrined in institutions like the United Nations, and it represents norms such as multilateralism. The US illegal invasion of Iraq in 2003, which I think which New Zealand was absolutely strategically right to oppose. Putin's invasion, or annexation, I should say, of Crimea in 2014, and the subsequent full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, as well as US and Israeli complicity in crimes against humanity in Gaza, and the Trump administration's cavalier use of tariffs have been grim landmarks in this trend towards the faltering international rules-based order. Third, the post-9/11 world has witnessed a relative decline in US global standing and a corresponding intensification of geopolitical rivalries. America has remained the most powerful state in the world, but this reality should not mask the relative decline of the US in terms of what political scientist Joseph Nye called its soft power. It's a power to lead by example, its autonomy, and its ability to influence others in the contemporary global context. Few liberal democracies today, at this moment when I speak to you, look to the United States political system as a model to emulate. The decline, the relative decline of the United States in the last 20 years or so has stemmed from both self-inflicted problems and changes in the international arena that were beyond America's control. The US financial burden of sustaining a counter-terrorist campaign for more than 2 decades, known as the Global War on Terror, had a price tag exceeding $8 trillion US dollars. And China's emergence in the interim as a second superpower by 2010, which coincided with China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region, and of course the United States responding by attempting to counterbalance a rising China's influence through institutions like a strengthened Quad and a new security partnership such as AUKUS, which was put together in September 2021, involving the United States, Australia and the UK. So far, I've outlined trends, globalization, and the relative decline of the United States to mention but two, which to some extent can be viewed in some ways negatively. Fourth, and somewhat paradoxically, but very importantly in my view, the post-9/11 global environment has been marked by a steady growth of transboundary issues that are too big for even superpowers to fix. That is to say, what we're living through, this international transition in the 21st century, we're seeing the proliferation of issues which do not respect state borders. And many of these problems, a former UN Secretary General described this process as problems without passports. What sort of problems are we talking about? Climate change? Pandemics like COVID-19? Transnational terrorism? Yes, the US did have a unilateral stab at trying to fix that, but it didn't work out very well. And yes, and many of you in this room will be more aware of this than I am, financial contagion. The latter, financial contagion, refers to the transmission of economic problems from one country or region to another, often but not always through financial markets channels. For example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine generated commodity price shocks, exacerbated financial market volatility, and led to a cost of living crisis in many countries. Thus, the current international situation in 2026 is, in my view, one of both alarm and hope. Flagrant breaches of international law, great power threats and bullying, and worsening geopolitical tensions coexist uneasily with multiplying problems that can only be resolved through self-interested international cooperation. For New Zealand, a strong advocate of an international rules-based order, all governments since the 1945 period, throughout the post-45 period, whether they be Labour-led or national-led, have staunchly supported the idea that international affairs should be based on rules and procedures and principles. So New Zealand has been strong supporter of multilateralism and free trade. But it's got to be said that while New Zealand has always maintained this position, it's become much more challenging for New Zealand to uphold that position, particularly since 2016. Since 2016, Labour and national-led governments have largely pursued risk-averse foreign policies that were intended to preserve or even strengthen positive relations with two rival superpowers, the United States and China. But New Zealand's softly diplomacy was really put to the test with the advent of the second Trump administration. Unfortunately, it was clear with the publication of the US National Security Strategy, the NSS, in Washington in December 2025, that softly diplomacy had not moderated or constrained Trump's revisionism. Now, I want to emphasise here, New Zealand has not been alone in pursuing a softly approach towards the second Trump administration. Most liberal democracies, including UK and many European countries, Australia as well, have pursued a similar approach. But the NSS document made it quite clear that the Trump administration had not responded to constructive diplomacy from many of its liberal democratic allies. The document makes for stark reading. It prioritises state sovereignty above all else. It completely rejects multilateral institutions unless they explicitly advance US interests. It advocates strict limits on migration and also free trade. And even more disturbingly, from a New Zealand point of view, the NSS document outlines a vision of global order managed by a small concert of just 5 great powers. The United States at the top of the table, helped by China, Russia, India, and Japan. So it's a sort of back to the future approach, a sort of borrowing from the 19th century idea, the concert of powers in Europe. The contrast between Trump's approach to international affairs and New Zealand's worldview is stark and irreconcilable. It's time for New Zealand to come to terms with this reality. As Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Council, remarked, "The West as we knew it no longer exists," unquote. Besides, as Carney observed in Davos, middle powers like Canada and small powers like New Zealand are not, quote, powerless in the current global context. There is an alternative foreign policy path for middle and small powers other than seeking favour with great powers. It should be emphasised that middle and small powers constitute the overwhelming majority in the international arena. Around 185 states can be classified as middle powers or small powers. These states now have the opportunity to build a new international order that reflects their values and interests in a reinvigorated rules-based approach to trade and security. Discussions between the European Union and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership are intended to create a rules-based trade alliance comprising more than 1.5 billion people. And such an arrangement, if realised, will exclude China and the United States. I know the Prime Minister referred to this in his remarks this morning, but I would argue that should be just the start. Much more needs to be done. So what are we talking about here? New Zealand and other middle and small powers must step up their efforts to constrain the veto privileges of the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, which in the 21st century have effectively served to destabilise global security, which of course affects the global economy. I know what you're thinking. You may be thinking, oh, this is just another idealist academic. It's going to be terribly difficult for the permanent 5 to give up the veto privilege. True. It would be extraordinarily difficult to achieve such a multilateral initiative. But the consequences of failing to respond to Carney's call to action will mean that some of the most pressing international problems, including those that directly impact on the global economy, will continue to be largely neglected or ignored. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great to be here, and for those who haven't noticed, it's election year, of course, and the big question one gets is, what's going to happen? Who's going to win the election? Well, the short answer is it's very close. The long, complicated answer, it's very, very, very close. And I've got a few quick slides to take you through just to illustrate that. This is projected seats in the Curia poll since 2021. Now, yeah, look back then, it wasn't a contest. There was no question that Labor was going to get a third term. In fact, when people asked me back then, do I think they'll get a third term, I actually said that's the wrong question. It's will they get 4 or 5 terms. It was actually quite unthinkable when there was that big a gap, but it closed up, and cost of living is that biggest factor there. There were others to do with the COVID-19, etc. And then you can see the centre right, and that's the 3 National Act New Zealand First, had a pretty big lead going up to the 2023 election, and for most of 2024 they had a fairly comfortable thing. 2025 has been different. It's been very close. There's been, I think, 51 polls since the beginning of 2025, 49, 25 of them have had a national-led government, 18 a Labour-led government, and 4 a hung parliament. So that's really, really close. And my latest poll has it 60 seats each. So again, you know, margin of error, it really could go either way. The most important question, though, we ask isn't the party vote. Politicians think it is, and of course is important, but it's country direction. And it partly ties into what you heard from Robert. This is asked all around the world, and it's really a gut instinct thing. Do you think your country is heading in the right direction or the wrong direction? So it's not just about the government, but generally, if people think the country's going well, governments will get re-elected. If it's not going well, it doesn't mean they won't get re-elected. Barack Obama did. But it means they'll ask a second question. Do I think the other team could do a better job? If it's going well, they don't even tend to think about the opposition, basically. And if you look back, 2021, massively plus 50% country direction means almost 80% thinks the country's going the right way, 20% don't. But look at that decline from plus 50 to minus 40 in just 2 years. Never ever in New Zealand have we seen a decline like that. And after the election, it did bounce back up, but not back to plus 20, plus 30, plus 40. So often you do get a honeymoon. It was mildly positive, and then as the economy got tighter again, it's gone down to around that minus 10. So from one point of view, if you're the government, minus 10 isn't great. You'd rather it was plus 10. But let's just take a quick look at some other countries. Now, what the hell is that, you might think? It looks like a drunk kangaroo. Well, actually, it's something even more fun in Australia than a drunk kangaroo. It's called rolling prime ministers. Every time they roll a prime minister, that's the peak. Albanese is the only prime minister not to actually win 2 in a row since John Howard. So they get deliriously happy when Abbott goes or Turnbull goes or Rudd went the first time, the second time, but never lasts. And then they think, oh, actually, we're about stuffed again. And if you look at the latest one, Albanese just won in a landslide, only got up to plus 4 country direction. It's already down to almost minus 10. So that's Australia. This is Canada. Back under the early days of Trudeau, pretty positive, absolutely plummeted. Of interest, Mark Carney took over. Trudeau was quite hated, but they only went up to minus 10. And even though Carney's ahead in the polls, they're already down to minus 20. So Canada actually is more negative about their country direction than New Zealand is. But if you're a bit depressed, if you're Canadian or a Kiwi or an Aussie, let's have a look at our friends in, we'll do New Zealand, then Great Britain. New Zealand's unusual. Look at that period, 2007 to 2021, massively happy. Doesn't matter GFC, earthquakes, Pike River, all that stuff, we had confidence in direction. Happened under Key, happened under English, happened first term of Ardern too. But again, you see that massive fall off. And so where we are is better than some other countries, but it's a bit unusual for us because people are still grumpy, and I think undoubtedly it's still cost of living. People don't understand, this room does, that a drop of 4% in the inflation rate isn't a 4% drop in prices. It's just the prices aren't going up so much. And it's still by far the number one issue. But now let's look at the UK. Now, you're wondering what that peak is. That was Brexit. Not when they voted for it, when after 22 failed votes in the House of Commons, Boris finally got Brexit done. They thought the system works, but then they changed their mind. And they're back to minus 50. The new government's only been in 14 months, and minus 50 is terrible. That's 4 out of 5 people are effectively saying, I think we're hopeless, we're going the wrong way there. But they did have their little Brexit peak, and also when David Cameron came in, a brief thing. Let's look at the United States. Now, there's nothing above zero because they haven't been above zero. Even when Obama won, 08, 12, hope change, all that, etc., they've never been positive. Interesting thing is Trump at the moment has them at minus 20. Not great, but a lot better than in the past because he has, for better or worse, and it is worse, reached out to people who felt the system hasn't worked for 40 years and they've finally got someone in who speaks for them. If you actually went back to 1970s, they haven't been positive since the 1970s. That's why they look for the outsider. That it just, they feel that it just hasn't worked. So, going on from that, I talked about cost of living. Here you can see cost of living is the orange line. Before inflation got out of control, it was the 10th biggest issue. It was on 2%. And it's really interesting because it went up to 35. Inflation is back from 7 to 3%, but still there, very much the most powerful issue. People just, if you can't pay your power bills, you struggle to fill the car up with petrol, everything else becomes a secondary issue. The other major issue worth commenting, though, obviously the economy is always there, but health is clearly the third issue of importance to people. Really important, too, is we know what's important to people. To get some idea of who's going to win apart from who are you going to vote for, we ask who's better on these issues, because then that gives you some idea of when they get to the ballot box, if we know it's important to them, what might they do? And this just compares those who say National and Labour is better. On the economy, National's got a 14% lead. That's really important. They cannot win if they lose that. They are seen as the better economic manager party. 14's not a bad lead. Did used to be over 30 though, so it has got tighter. They're behind on health by around 10%. That's pretty normal. Generally, centre-left parties are seen as better on the soft health, education, welfare, poverty, environment. Centre-right tends to be better on economy, law and order, etc. Poverty is similar to that, where 12% gap. Here's interesting though, inflation. Not sure where I'm meant to be pointing this. Nationals only go 1% lead. So that's part of why I think it's really competitive. This one surprises me. It surprises me looking normally, but not for what Erica Stanford has done. National has a 6% lead on education. That's really unusual. Really, really unusual. Don't tell Erica this, but if I had my way, I'd tell National to say goodbye to her family, and she should be on the road every day, every weekend for the next 8 months, because I think she has a story to sell there that people actually are accepting. Taxes, Labour's slightly ahead of National. This is on asking, will raise taxes on you. So all these levies and that have been coming out possibly are having some impact there. No surprise, National ahead on law and order. Wasteful spending, National's ahead of by, but only 8%. It used to be a lot more. When they came in, they were probably 30%, seemed better at that. And then you've got housing, which I think is really unfair, actually, but that's just what people perceive, that Labour's better on housing. And, of course, you've got the environment. So the really key ones to me are health. National can be behind on health, but if it gets too far behind, that becomes a problem. Economy, inflation. Next, we've got favourability, just a couple more slides. This is just like, do you like these people? Because generally that helps for voting for them. As you can see, both Hipkins and Luxon are slightly negative. Seymour more so, the two Te Pahi Māori co-leaders deeply negative, and that is important because people understand MMP. I think it might be in a close election the difference. Winston is actually the most favourable Pahi leader at the moment. And that is really unusual. And just see, no, I haven't got the time series. He was at minus 40% 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago. Labour voters hated him because he had turned on the government. He was now campaigning against them. But National voters hated him because he put Jacinda in, he worked with Helen Clark, he betrayed Jenny Shipley, like 20 years of hatred. But now, let me tell you, National voters like Winston, ACT voters like Winston. Do you know what ACT campaigned on? Stop Winston. That was their whole message, was stop Winston, and now they like him. And Labour voters don't like him, but dislike him less than the other centre-right leaders because they see he's a bit of a rogue. So that combined has actually put Peters there. And this is partly why New Zealand First are now polling 12%. They came in on 6%. Very unusual. Know what they normally do in government? Crash and burn. 3 times they've been in, 3 times they've crashed under 5%. This time they're actually going up. Now, you saw Luxon at around minus 13 there, Hipkins there. And look, if you'd rather be plus 10 than minus 10 again. But let's just look at some of the other heads of government around the world. Mark Carney is doing well, new PM, of course, etc. But, we've heard about the Davos speech. The Taoiseach of Ireland is slightly negative. Albanese is already at minus 10 months after winning a landslide election. You've got Luxon there. You've got Trump there, who very polarising, but also has his fans. Chancellor of Germany, minus 40. The UK Prime Minister... And also the UK opposition leaders around minus 42. So that's why, in fact, tying into what Robert said, 9 of the 12 biggest countries in Europe are either led by a populist government or they're leading in the polls. And that includes France, Germany, and the UK. There. But then you also talk here of France, just to show they can beat the British, even more unpopular there. So, again, when you look at New Zealand, yes, basically globally, cost of living, other factors are still an issue. All incumbents are facing generally pretty tough headwinds there. So that's just the slides to subdue a scene session. Looking forward now to the panel discussion.
Thanks, David. That's outstanding as always. So what we've tried to do with Outlook this year is give you a really broad picture of what's going on and what the implications are then for New Zealand. So hopefully we've been able to achieve that. We've obviously got a great panel here, and we'll open questions from the floor shortly because I know you'll have a lot of searching questions for these people. But before we do that, Cath, can I get you just, because we obviously released our State of the Sector report today. It's got some really good news stories in it from a business perspective and a productivity perspective for New Zealand. Can you just run us through your viewpoint of some of the challenges and the opportunities highlighted in the report, particularly for the life and health insurance sector?
To. And I've got to say a plug for the report as an actuary. It's got a lot of numbers in there, which of course you can imagine I think is fantastic. So I'm a big fan. So starting with the life insurance industry, one of the things I just wanted to flag there, it does show in there the premiums are increasing over time, but at about 3% per annum. So quite a low rate really for that. And that's really showing that penetration of that insurance isn't increasing. And New Zealand as a country, it does have one of the lowest, has one of the highest underinsurance rates, should I say, for developed countries in the world when you measure it as a percent, like life insurance premiums, as a percentage of GDP. So that's an OECD measure. So that isn't something that we're necessarily seeing improving at this stage. There's, challenges there, whether it's financial literacy, which was talked about earlier, or whether it's it's challenging to face mortality and to actually even think about these sort of things. And also just how do we meet our new generations, meet them digitally and so on. So there's things like that. Affordability issues obviously have been an issue more recently. So that's been a challenge. So even keeping the premiums where they are during these tough times is actually quite an achievement, but it is just definitely something that we need to focus on. Around health insurance, again, there's been challenges challenges recently there. In the report, we show that premiums and claims have been increasing over time. That actually is a challenge in that industry, as you know, there've been health insurance challenges in the system with public health, and that's meant a lot of movement into needing to claim in the private health sector, and that means that both more claims per policy, basically, and more expensive claims per policy. So that claims inflation's been going up as well as the utilisation. So that's a challenge there. In terms of the positives, yeah, I guess I see a lot. You know, let's do some positives. So I've done the negative. So I'm glad you got me to end on the high. So we actually have a global CEO insurance outlook survey, and in that it talks about, you know, how those CEOs see the future, and they were quite positive on the economy. This is obviously global, but you know, it was really positive to see that they saw that their businesses were going to grow. The second thing they talked about, and everyone talks about it, we've talked about it multiple times here already, is around AI. And so in that, about 75, I might not have that exactly right, but about 75% of CEOs and so on were saying they're going to put about 10 to 20% of their budget to AI, which is amazing looking forward. And about 67% are expecting returns within the next 1 to 3 years. So it shows, whereas that used to be about 24%. So really seeing that, they're actually seeing that it's going to actually pay off a lot sooner. A key thing is going to be getting our people up, you know, and being able to do it. So they see that as one of the key things. So that is, and then ethical, you know, the ethics around AI and just trying to manage that, and that's a barrier to getting that happening. But that's exciting, and everyone's talking about it. I don't think I've been to a panel where we haven't talked about AI and how that's going. And then the other one is, and I know we haven't talked about it much here, is probably around ESG. So this, I admit that this survey does cover general insurance, but I still think it's relevant for life and health in terms of those newer generations. This is a real focus for them, and we need to meet them where they are, and they look more holistically than just the premiums and just the numbers, etc. So those would be my couple of things.
Brilliant, thanks, Cath. And again, you know, we'll open up for questions shortly. Just one final question for Aimie before we do that. How are we as an industry best placed to utilise the report with decision makers and regulators?
Yeah, look, I think today was a really good opportunity. I think the Prime Minister gave you guys and also us, the FSC, a really good opportunity there, you know, really being focused in regards to what we're doing and what we're advocating for. I think we're in a really good stead with that. If you think about the conversations we've already been having around, you know, KiwiSaver and its role for New Zealand going forward, also as that long-term savings product, also for the fact that, like, you know, we're trying to take the politics out of KiwiSaver. You know, we can't have political parties tinkering around the edges. Actually, we need to be bipartisan and agree to its usefulness for New Zealanders, but also what it means long term in regards to a social aspect for New Zealand. I also think we're really united if we think about the role that insurance plays for New Zealanders. It's really important that life and health insurance are there as products for New Zealanders, and I think the strength, as much as we have had claims, you know, actually playing out insurance claims is a success. You know, that means New Zealanders are supported, whether that is through medical aspects or, for example, for someone struggling with their mental health and they can lean on their life insurance policy. Like those are good things that we need to think about and what that does for people. It also means it helps families in regards to aspects. So instead of a family, you know, potentially having something quite catastrophic for them and ending in poverty, actually those products can help them through, and that means education for children. It also means, you know, a home over there for them and things like that. But I think we're in a good stead. I think the sector's got some really solid numbers there in that report, and all of you guys will get a nice little chunky copy, as Cath said, of it. But there's some really good positions that we're working towards.
Thanks, Aimie. I might ask Professor Patman one sort of question that one sort of thing that the Prime Minister raised is that the shift from rules-based to power is changing the way that that countries are managing certain things like their own resilience and security, right? So from a resilience perspective, we saw after COVID, we saw supply chains shorten, and that led to inflation, and that has, again, long-term consequences. Not just, it goes right through the global economy, but you know, we saw we've seen the political consequences of that, and we've seen the cost of living consequences of that. Do you think that's a real risk in the global economy going forward?
It's a risk, but it's a qualified risk. It's been a relatively small number of countries that have been engaging in the projection of power. And the second thing is, we haven't actually got any global leadership at the moment. No country, if you look at COVID-19 when we had the pandemic, it wasn't the United States or China rallying the world to deal with a problem that was threatening everyone. And Instead, we have the world's most powerful country claiming that climate change doesn't actually exist. It's a hoax. So, in a sense, while countries are projecting power, we're seeing Mr. Trump threaten the territorial integrity of Canada and also has designs on Greenland, which of course is very disruptive for the democratic world. I don't think in the long run that's sustainable. It's already generating a backlash. The fact of the matter is that problems like climate change, pandemics, transnational terrorism, financial contagion, those problems are not going away. So what I would say, I'm slightly more skeptical about the so-called shift from rules to power. I mean, I certainly acknowledge absolutely that we're witnessing a reinvigoration of great power rivalry. But, and here I'm reflecting on the comments of a friend of mine who's an American academic, and he said, watching the two most powerful countries during COVID-19 was like watching two aging males who were short of hair arguing over a comb. Neither of them, they blamed each other for the problem, but neither of them could fix it. And actually, whether we like it or not, climate change is not going away, nor are global pandemics. And so, kicking and screaming, countries are going to have to cooperate, or they're not going to solve those problems. So we're facing what Edmund Burke once said, choices between the intolerable and the disagreeable. On balance, I really recognise the problems that the Prime Minister alluded to, namely geopolitical, assertion. But I think it depends on the reaction of the rest of the world. And I think in the 21st century, simply because these problems are so big and they can't be fixed by great powers, the United States can't unilaterally fix climate change, even if it wants to, nor can China. The only way we can fix these problems is for all countries, middle and small powers, to have buy-in, to play a role. So in a sense, in the 21st century, although we're witnessing in the short term a surge in geopolitical activity, in the long term, there's going to be increased leverage and opportunities for small and middle powers to play a greater role in shaping the world. Mind you, that doesn't mean they will take that opportunity. But I think Carney's speech was significant because it struck a real raw nerve around the world. People were not happy with the direction of trying to be ultra constructive with people who are simply interested in projecting their own power.
The reason I asked that question is because obviously, what we've seen is, again, cost of living has an impact. It impacts, the people in this room and their customers, right? And it also drives international behaviour because it's been experienced around the world. And I think, what we've seen is a drive towards much more direct sovereignty, a slight move away from globalisation, right?
Yeah.
An example of that, which New Zealanders might not be aware of, is this amazing piece of American legislation. David might know about it. It's called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Right, that's an amazing name for a piece of legislation. I should try putting that through the House, Minister Simpson. But what it does is actually provides 100% depreciation on assets for people who are building facilities that develop microchips. It's approximately worth to the American economy $500 billion. So if you take tariffs and you take that is an incredible economic pendulum that is sort of swinging against us. The question is, and I think we all in the room know that tariffs don't work. The question is, are they working, David, politically for Trump at the moment? Are those things that he's doing working?
No, he's got lower favourability than Biden did in his first term. He won on the economy. He won on cost of living because people were sick of it. And he's actually now underwater on economic management because, bluntly, consumers pay the cost of tariffs, etc. And look, for his base, he's a genius at riling them up. But they're only 35%, and the people in the middle, the independents, think he's lost focus on cost of living, the economy, and the tariffs are deeply unpopular there. But they're not going away because I think for Trump, it's not the economy, it's the power. We heard about soft and hard power. He loves getting up in the morning and announcing new tariffs. The Supreme Court struck down the 10% tariffs, so he announces a 15% tariff on everyone.
Thank you. So then the next question I have, here we got a question. From Roger Beaumont, awesome.
Hello. Kirk, as you know, I always follow your wise counsel and instruction. So my question's for David, actually. Given your familiarity with all the polling and all the issues here domestically in New Zealand and the closeness of the upcoming election that you described, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be the one circuit breaker that you think could tip things in favour of the current government to a win?
That's interesting because I know the circuit breaker that would tip it the other way, and that's the next CPI figure. We're at 3.1. Aussie's just gone to 3.8. And the Reserve Bank of Australia has said they expect 4 OCR increases this year. If we get a 3.5 and the Reserve Bank starts to do either 1 or 2 middle of the year, I think that makes it really tough for the government. In terms of the circuit breaker for the government, I think the budget has the potential, if they get a credible path back to surplus, if the economic growth is letting the tax flow through, so they're actually able to do above spending in the key areas, etc. That's important. The other one, it's not a circuit breaker, but if I'm running Nationals campaign, it's this close, I would be talking Te Pāhi Māori a lot, because there's been 90 polls since the last election. 0 have shown Labour can govern without Te Pāhi Māori, a single poll, and as you saw, their numbers there. And if you ask people, do you want a national or Labour-led government, it tends to be around dead even. If you ask National New Zealand First Act versus Labour Green Te Pāhi Māori, then you get around the 6% gap. So you shouldn't need that to get your second term. Generally, second term should be look at what we've done, ignore the opposition, but that's not the situation they're in. So I think they actually have to make the case against the opposition. And that's partly why Chippy's trying to say nothing. You're ahead in the polls. Why would you actually, you don't want people to think about you. You just want people to think, I'm not that happy with the status quo. Maybe we'll give it a change. Having said that, his problem's going to be Greens and Te Pāhi Māori are going to have lots of policy. So if Labour don't announce policy, well, yeah, it could get interesting.
Anna.
Morning. Actually, taking a combination of two of those statements, we talk about the global picture and the fact it's not about the power and it's the small and middle. If we translate that and overlay that into New Zealand, then, Aimie, from an advocacy point of view, New Zealand's got some of its own big challenges that are long-term, that we need to have a sure plan on to know what outcome we're driving for. And I would suggest that requires maybe some of the political collaboration that we're talking about that the globe needs. From an advocacy point of view, do you see those openings in terms of bipartisan discussions and people on the big education, retirement adequacy, health, infrastructure? Are we getting closer to people being concerned about a longer term plan together?
I think definitely, especially around retirement savings, you look at those figures with Treasury with the impact that, superannuation is going to have on New Zealanders and whether we can afford that. You also have the impact in regards to health funding and whether we can afford that. And I think the thing is that, there is really positive conversations that the FSC is happening. And, I will thank Scott and his team and many others, and also other political parties themselves, they are listening in regards to the way that our sector can support and understanding what those burdens are or the way we want to. I also think many of you are also in the room with many of them and they listen to you. They understand how you can help and support. And so it's not just obviously, if we think about retirement savings, we look at Australia across the ditch and what that has meant for them. That's a really good thing, but also the fact that, their system does include other things like health insurance and life insurance in it. And I think, we need to be making sure that people are understanding what that means. But also from a perspective for Australia, geopolitically, their scheme is becoming a trading chip for them in the world. Because, they can go, actually, we've got one of the biggest superannuation economies. how we invest that is really important. So, New Zealand needs to think about those long-term things, about how we use those bargaining chips. But I definitely do think that people are realising, and I think it's really clear, like last election, infrastructure was the big election topic. I think it's quite clear that superannuation is going to be the next one, and with this year and what that looks like going forward.
Cath, Aimie just mentioned, so we've talked about some of the global, mainly risks. And some of the domestic risks in terms of how New Zealanders protect themselves through their savings and through their insurance. I mean, Aimie just alluded to it. What are the key differences that you've had a lot of experience in Australia? What are the key differences that you see there? How hard would it be to emulate some of the components of that system in New Zealand, and what would stop us?
That's an interesting one. So across a lot of it. So, I mean, superannuation is obviously a good place to start. So I've lived in Australia for the last 25 years and just moved back to New Zealand. So I've just come home. So you're right, I've been living in that system. And the superannuation system there, the government one is means tested. It has now, I think it's now 67 is when it comes in, depending on when you were born. But they have had since 1993, we've had contributions there. So it is a real positive, like you said. It's built a powerhouse. I think it's really around what do we want for New Zealand? What level of savings? How much you want your NZ Super to stay? It's really going to be that, as you said. I think that's a bipartisan thing. It's a discussion that needs to be had. There's different views on that, but definitely higher contribution than now for people to be, whether it's with New Zealand Super or without, we want our New Zealanders to have prosperity in retirement and to have enough to live on, and whatever that looks like. In terms of, and the super system over in Australia has life insurance built into it as a default. So they're underinsurance problem, they would still say they've got an underinsurance problem, but it's less than here because everybody's got that default. It is quite a low level of default. And there's a lot of debate over there around, then is that eating into your retirement? It's like you can't win sometimes. Like it's a bit of both because it's eating some of those retirement savings because it's coming out of your super. But, it is positive there to see that there's some more insurance covering everyone in the working population. Health insurance, again, a different one. That's community rated. So what I do see here is that those costs do go up, obviously with age here. If you enter health insurance there before age 30, then your premium is the same as, when you're 60, it's the same as the 30-year-old coming in. So it has to be community rated there. So it's interesting there that, as affordability gets more of a challenge there, we have that here. That's sort of partly how it's being managed there. There's also a stick there in terms of if you earn above a certain amount of income, you get more tax. So I can't remember whether it's 1.5% or 2% tax. So there's an encouragement, again, for people to be more insured in health insurance, which helps. I don't know enough about where it's at the moment. There were definitely challenges around sustainability there as well. So that's, challenges everywhere. They'll have some in terms of costs going up and so on. So it's really about what we want as a society and what's the right balance. And it's really important, I think, that we have, there is the government safety net. It's how much do you want to be privately funded versus that. But what we want overall is that prosperity for all New Zealanders. So finding a balance.
Yeah.
Thanks. Great comments. Can I just join me in thanking the panel for their time? I just want to thank you all for the time and support this morning of the Financial Services Council. Obviously, we released the State of the Sector report today to do some cheerleading for the industry. We think there's some really strong messages in there, and we encourage you to share it.